The silence was the only thing that proved we were still human. Out here, in the skeletal remains of what was once Chicago, the wind was the loudest sound, a lonely howl that scraped through the canyons of dead skyscrapers. We lived in the quiet places, the pockets of the world the signal couldn't reach, shielded by geology and sheer luck. Everywhere else, there was the song, a constant subliminal broadcast that had blanketed the globe 5 years ago. It wasn't a sound you heard with your ears, but with your soul. It was a melody of pure contentment, a psychic lullaby that smoothed over every sharp edge of human emotion. It erased fear, anger, ambition, and grief, leaving only a placid, serene emptiness. The architects of this piece, the beings we called the Weavers, never showed themselves. They didn't need to. Why send armies when a single, perfect note could conquer the world? They gave us peace, and in exchange, we gave them our minds. I was the exception that broke the rule. My name is Kalen, and I hear the song differently. For the 99% of humanity now living in the harmony, it's a gentle hum that guides their every action, turning cities into silent, synchronized ballets of purpose. For me, it's a dissonant shriek, a chorus of a billion stolen thoughts all screaming at once. I was born broken, my mind an anomaly they couldn't pacify. The resistance found me huddled in a subway tunnel, bleeding from my ears, trying to claw the noise out of my own skull. They called me their oracle. I just called it a curse. It's why I was here, trudging through the rust-colored dust of the magnificent mile. My focus narrowed on the needle-like structure that pierced the polluted sky, the Eterna Tower. It wasn't there before the Weavers. It had grown out of the earth like a crystalline fungus, a shimmering, impossible thing of silver and light that pulsed in time with the global song. Our intelligence, pieced together from scraps and guesses, suggested it was more than an ornament. It was a spire, a psychic amplifier that kept this entire hemisphere docile and dreaming, and our plan was to pull it down. Status. Kyle. Anya's voice crackled in my ear, a welcome splinter of reality in the noise. She was the leader of our cell, a woman carved from granite and pragmatism. She saw the world in objectives and acceptable losses. And I was her most valuable asset. What's the song telling you? I close my eyes, letting the psychic storm wash over me. It was like dipping my head into a waterfall of static, but within the chaos, there were currents, patterns. It's calm. The harmony is on its standard cycle. The biomass is being rerouted from the residential sectors to the hydroponic farms on the lakefront. Biomass. That's what we call them. The millions of people who moved through the city like a single, tranquil organism. Their individual wills dissolved into the collective. They were not slaves. Not exactly. They were content. That was the most terrifying part. No sentinels, she asked. Sentinels were the Weavers' physical presence on Earth, and they were rare. Not creatures of flesh and blood, but something far worse. They were localized glitches in reality, knots in space-time that moved through the world like heat haze, silent and utterly lethal. Looking at one for too long could unmake your mind. I don't feel any, I whispered, my head throbbing. The spire's primary defense is the ambient field. It's so strong here. It feels like syrup. Most people would fall into the harmony just by breathing the air. I could feel it myself. a seductive whisper at the edge of my consciousness, promising an end to the pain. A quiet place to rest. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood, the sharp sting of it a vital anchor to myself. "We're close," Anya said. "2 blocks out. Stay sharp." My job was to guide us through the city's psychic landscape, to find the dead zones and quiet paths where the song was weakest. We moved through the ruins of a grand old library, its books turned to petrified paper, the silence within its walls a different kind, a sacred quiet that felt like a tomb. Through the shattered glass of a window, I could see them, the biomass. They moved in effortless unison down the street, their faces empty of expression, their bodies swaying in a gentle, hypnotic rhythm. They weren't shuffling zombies, they were graceful, their movements efficient and coordinated as they tended to the strange, glowing flora that now grew in place of concrete sidewalks. A child, no older than 7, stopped and tilted his head, his gaze sweeping over our hiding place. His eyes were a placid, milky blue, and for a terrifying second, I thought he saw us. The noise in my head sharpened to a fine point, the song focusing through him. My breath hitched, but then, as if pulled by an invisible string, he turned and continued on his way, rejoining the silent river of people. "They don't see us," muttered Yorick, our heavy weapons specialist, a mountain of a man whose nerves were usually as steady as his aim. "It's like we're ghosts." "We are," I replied, my voice thin. To them, we're out of tune. We're a discordant note in a perfect symphony. They can't perceive us unless the song points us out, which is why a sentinel was so dangerous. It was the conductor's baton, capable of turning the entire orchestra against a single errant instrument. We pressed on, sticking to the shadows, a 4-person team against a sleeping world. Anya led, her movements economical and precise. Yorick covered our rear, his modified pulse rifle held at a low ready. And then there was Alara, our tech expert, a wiry woman whose fingers danced over her datapad, monitoring the city's dormant power grids and our own dwindling energy cells. We were ghosts, yes, but we were ghosts with a mission. The entrance to the Eterna Tower was not guarded by gates or guns, but by an invisible wall of psychic pressure. The closer we got, the more the song intensified, transitioning from a background scream to a physical force that vibrated in my bones. It felt like standing too close to a colossal speaker, the bass so deep it threatened to liquefy my organs. I saw images in my mind, not my own memories, but borrowed ones from the harmony. A mother's love for a child she no longer recognized as her own. A painter's passion for an art he had forgotten how to create, all of it smoothed over, repurposed, and woven into the tranquil tapestry of the song. "Kale, find us a way in," Anya ordered, her voice strained. She was feeling it too. Even for the non-sensitive, the field was a heavy blanket, inducing a lethargic calm that was hard to fight. I pushed past the tempting whispers of peace, focusing on the psychic architecture of the place. The spire was a massive instrument, and like any instrument, it had flaws, moments where the sound was imperfect. I ran my hand along the shimmering, crystalline wall of the tower's base. It felt like cool, smooth glass, yet it rippled at my touch. "Here," I gasped, stumbling to a section of the wall where the light seemed to bend inward. "There's a seam, a harmonic flaw." The energy field is weaker here. Ilara moved to my side, her device whirring. He's right. There's a frequency dip. It's unstable. She produced a small, cylindrical device from her pack. Resonance charge. It won't blast a hole, but it should be able to vibrate a section of the wall into a temporary phase shift. It'll give us a doorway for about 10 seconds. Do it, Anya commanded. Ilara placed the charge on the wall. It clung like a magnet. Stand back. The feedback might be unpleasant. She tapped her pad, and the device emitted a low hum that quickly rose in pitch until it was beyond hearing. The wall in front of us began to tremble, the solid light wavering like a mirage. The noise in my head exploded. I cried out, staggering back as the very fabric of the song was torn open. For a moment, I felt the raw, unfiltered consciousness of the Weavers, an intellect so vast and alien it felt like staring into the sun. It was a mind of pure, cold mathematics, of cosmic architecture, and we were less than insects to it. A minor imperfection in its grand design. Then the section of the wall dissolved into a shimmering liquid portal. Go, Anya yelled, shoving me forward. I stumbled through, the transition like plunging into icy water. Yorick and Ilara followed, and Anya came last, grabbing the resonance charge from the other side just as the portal solidified behind us. We were inside. The interior of the spire was a paradox. It felt both infinitely vast and claustrophobically small. The walls were made of the same living light, etched with geometric patterns that shifted and flowed like circuits. The air was cool and still, and the song was different in here, cleaner, purer. It was the source code. At the center of the immense chamber, suspended in midair by nothing, was the heart of the spire. It was a perfect, crystalline sphere about the size of a car, rotating slowly. It pulsed with a soft, internal light, and with every pulse, I felt the rhythm of a continent's worth of stolen dreams. That's it. Ilara breathed, her instruments going wild. The core. The energy readings are off the scale. Yorick set the primary charge. Anya said, her voice a low whisper. Ilara, get ready to interface. We need to create an overload cascade, not just shatter the crystal. We want it to send a feedback pulse so powerful it fries every lesser node in a 1,000-mile radius. But as Yorick began to unstrap the heavy explosive pack from his back, a change occurred. The pure, clean hum of the core began to curdle. A new note entered the song, a sharp, piercing tone of inquiry. It had noticed us. The light in the chamber flickered. Something's coming. I choked out, my eyes darting toward the shifting walls. Anya. It knows we're here. Hold your ground, she snapped, raising her rifle. Yorick, hurry up. The very air in front of the core began to shimmer, to distort. It was like watching reality itself begin to fray at the edges. A sentinel. It wasn't forming into a shape I could comprehend, but a void, a patch of wrongness that swallowed the light around it. My mind recoiled from the sight of it, the psychic shriek in my head becoming a physical agony. My vision blurred, and the whispers of the harmony turned into accusatory shouts. I saw my own team through its perception. Anya, a knot of violent resistance. Yorick, a vessel of crude destruction. Ilara, a discordant intelligence. And me. It saw me as a flaw. A broken string screaming in its perfect instrument. The Sentinel's presence was a direct assault. It wasn't attacking our bodies. It was attacking our sanity. I felt a phantom pressure on my chest, the memory of my brother's dying breath, a loss the song had tried and failed to erase. I saw Alara stumble, her face pale, her eyes wide with a terror only she could see. Yorick let out a guttural roar, firing a burst from his rifle not at the sentinel, but at a shadow in the corner of the room. He was hallucinating. "It's in our heads," Anya yelled, her own voice tight with strain. "Fight it, Call. Do something. Do what I was their compass, not their shield. My only gift was to listen to the storm, not to calm it." The sentinel's formless shape drifted toward Yorick, the air around him wavering. He screamed as his rifle began to glow cherry red, melting in his hands. He was being erased. The Weavers didn't kill. They corrected. They unmade things that didn't belong. In that moment, watching Yorick's form begin to blur at the edges, a desperate, furious idea sparked in my mind. The song was their weapon. They used it to control, to pacify, to attack, but it was still a part of me. I had spent my entire life trying to block it out, to build walls against the noise. What if, just for a second, I let it in? What if I became the discordant note it thought I was? I dropped to my knees, squeezed my eyes shut, and did the one thing I had never dared to do. I opened my mind. I tore down every wall, every defense, and let the full, raw power of the Spire's song flood into me. The pain was absolute, a supernova of psychic energy that should have incinerated my consciousness. But beneath the agony, I found the core of it, the pure, resonant frequency that was the foundation of the entire broadcast, and I screamed, not with my voice, but with my mind. I gathered every scrap of pain, every shred of anger, every jagged memory of the world we had lost, and I poured it into the song. I became a shriek of pure, concentrated grief and rage. For a single, eternal second, I was louder than the Weavers. The effect was instantaneous. The sentinel recoiled, its form flickering violently as my psychic scream tore through its manufactured reality. The illusions it projected into our minds shattered. Ilara gasped, her eyes clearing. Yorick's melting form solidified, and he stared at his still intact hands in disbelief. Anya, ever the pragmatist, didn't hesitate. Now she screamed. She fired a single high-energy bolt from her rifle. It wasn't aimed at the sentinel, but at the explosive pack Yorick had dropped at the base of the core. The bolt struck the detonator. The world turned white. The last thing I felt before the overload pulse hit was not the explosion, but a sudden, deafening silence. The song, the constant, agonizing companion of my entire life, was gone. The spire died, and for the first time, I was alone in my own head. The quiet was beautiful. It lasted for 3 seconds. Then, from the city outside, I heard a new sound rise. It was not a sound of peace or contentment. It was the terrified, confused, and utterly human sound of 1,000,000 people all waking up at once. It was the sound of screaming. The silence was a physical blow. For a moment, the four of us were suspended in the eye of a hurricane, the deafening roar of the song replaced by the ringing in my own ears. The white light of the explosion faded, revealing a chamber in ruin. The crystalline walls were cracked, the shifting geometric patterns frozen into jagged, ugly shapes. The core, the heart of the Continental Symphony, was gone, leaving behind a shimmering distortion in the air, a wound in reality itself. The spire was dying around us. A low, mournful chime echoed through the structure, the sound of a billion psychic connections snapping at once. Shards of solidified light rained down from the ceiling. Move, Anya's voice, raw and real, cut through my disorientation. She was already on her feet, pulling Ilara up from the floor. Out. Now, the way we came in. Yorick, his face pale and beaded with sweat from his near unmaking, shook his head as if waking from a nightmare. He looked at his hands, then at the dissipating wrongness where the sentinel had been. "It's gone," he whispered, a tremor of awe in his voice. "The noise. It's all gone." I knew what he meant. The quiet was so absolute, it felt like a pressure in my skull, a vacuum where a storm had raged for my entire life. I felt hollowed out, empty. My gift, my curse, had been carved out of me by the blast, and I was suddenly, terrifyingly normal. "The portal is closed," Ilara said, her voice shaking as she pointed to the wall. The shimmering doorway we had entered through was now just another section of dull gray crystal. The living light of the spire was fading to the color of dead coral. "Then we make a new one," Anya snapped, already assessing the crumbling chamber. "Jorik, your sidearm has an energy setting. Focus fire on the weakest point of that crack. Ilara, monitor the structural decay. Tell me when we're about to be buried. Kyle, stay with me. You're our eyes and ears out there." I almost laughed. My eyes were useless now, my psychic ears deaf. I was just a man with a headache in a collapsing alien tower, but I nodded, gripping the pistol at my hip. The world outside was a cacophony of screams, a rising tide of pure human panic. That was our new reality. Jorik's pistol spit a beam of focused energy, striking the cracked wall with a high-pitched sizzle. The crystal groaned, resisting. We were ants trying to chew our way out of a diamond. The ground trembled beneath us, a deep, resonant shudder that signaled the tower's death throes. I could feel the psychic aftershock, not as a sound, but as an echo in the empty spaces of my mind. It was a wave of pure chaos, the emotional backlash of millions of minds waking up inside a cage they never knew existed. Fear, confusion, grief for years they couldn't remember losing, rage with no target. It was all flooding the city, a psychic tsunami. And we were about to step out onto the beach. "It's working," Ilara shouted over the din. A spiderweb of new cracks spread from the point of impact. With a final explosive pop, a section of the wall blew outward, revealing the bruised twilight of the Chicago sky. We scrambled through the opening, half jumping, half falling onto a wide plaza that surrounded the spire's base. We landed hard on strange, soft ground that had once been pavement, but was now a carpet of the Weaver's bioluminescent moss. And we saw what we had done. The city was burning, not with fire, but with humanity. The graceful, synchronized ballet of the biomass was gone. In its place was a writhing, screaming mob. A man in a tailored suit stood on a planter, staring at his own hands as if they were alien things, a low keen escaping his lips. A woman in a simple tunic tore at her hair, her face a mask of utter desolation, weeping for a family she could now remember but couldn't find. Fights were breaking out, brutal and clumsy, over nothing. A group of people had surrounded one of the Weaver's glowing flora structures and were tearing it apart with their bare hands, their movements frantic and purposeless. They weren't monsters. They were children, waking from a 5-year coma into a world they didn't recognize. Their minds flooded with every sharp emotion the song had suppressed. This wasn't a victory. It was an apocalypse of the soul. Extraction is 2 miles north, at the old water purification plant on the river, Anya said, her voice tight, her eyes scanning the chaos. She had stripped the mission down to its barest essentials: survive, escape, report. We move fast and we don't engage. These people aren't the enemy. They're just lost. We hugged the edge of the plaza, moving from the shadow of one dead skyscraper to another. No one paid us any mind. They were all locked in their own private hells. The sheer scale of the suffering was a physical weight. Yorick, a man who had faced down alien horrors, looked ill. He had been trained to fight monsters, not to watch an entire city have a collective nervous breakdown. My own senses felt raw, overloaded. Without the song to filter the world, every sight, every sound was painfully sharp. The stench of the moss, the cold bite of the wind, the texture of the cracked ground beneath my boots. It was all new, and the quiet in my head made the screams outside seem 10 times louder. I was blind. Before, I could feel the currents of the harmony, sense the psychic dead zones. Now, I couldn't tell what was around the next corner. A panicked crowd, alone. Grieving soul. There was no pattern, no rhythm, just pure, unpredictable chaos. A man stumbled out of an alleyway, his eyes wide and unfocused. He saw us, and his face contorted in a mask of pure terror. "You," he shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. "You're not one of us. Your clothes. You're not in the song." Before Anya could say a word, he lunged, his nails clawing for my face. Yorick intercepted him, shoving him back with a grunt. The man fell, scrambled away, and was swallowed by the churning crowd. His shouts of "outsiders" lost in the general din. "He's right," Alara muttered, pulling the hood of her cloak down to hide her face. "Our gear marks us. We look like soldiers in a world that's forgotten what war is." "Then we look like ghosts," Anya countered. "Keep your heads down and keep moving." Our path took us through the financial district, where the streets were narrower. Here, the chaos was more concentrated. People were breaking the windows of shops they no longer had any use for, driven by a desperate need to do something, to exert some form of will. I saw a woman cradling a disconnected datapad, sobbing as she tried to access pictures of a life she could only just remember. I saw a man methodically banging his head against a wall, the rhythmic thud a desperate attempt to find a pattern in a world that had lost its own. This was the peace the Weavers had given them. Not a cure for humanity's ills, but a suppression of symptoms. We hadn't liberated these people. We had just reintroduced them to their pain. Halfway to the river, something new began to cut through the noise. A voice, not a psychic one, but a real one, amplified, booming from the city's old emergency broadcast system. "Do not panic," the voice said, smooth and authoritative, the kind of voice that was used to being obeyed. "A state of emergency has been declared. The Harmony Field has suffered a catastrophic failure. Central Authority is taking control. Please remain calm. Order will be restored." I looked at Anya. "Central Authority? Who the hell is that?" "Collaborators." She spat, her face grim. "There were always rumors. Pockets of the old guard, governments and corporations, who made a deal with the Weavers. In exchange for maintaining their power and infrastructure, they'd help manage the Harmony." "Manage people," Yorick growled. "Shepherds for the flock. The voice continued, listing directives, curfews, designated shelters. It was a futile attempt to impose the old world's rules on a new world's nightmare. But then, the broadcast changed. A new sound emerged, a low, pulsing hum. It was nothing like the song's complex melody. This was a single, ugly, synthetic frequency, a brute force signal. On the street, the effect was immediate. Some of the screaming people clutched their heads, their panic dissolving into a slack-jawed stupor. Others simply collapsed, their bodies twitching. "They're trying to replicate the signal," Ilara said, looking at her data pad. "It's crude, but it's overloading their synapses. They're trying to force them back to sleep." "We need to get out of the open," Anya said, her eyes scanning the rooftops. "That signal is a blanket. They'll follow it up with sweeps. Jorik, that service entrance. Get it open." We ducked into a dark, trash-strewn maintenance corridor that ran beneath the street, the sounds of the city mercifully muffled. In the dim light of Ilara's headlamp, I leaned against the cold concrete wall, my legs shaking. The emptiness in my head was beginning to ache, a phantom limb where my curse used to be. But as I focused on that emptiness, I felt something else, a flicker, a residue. When the spire shattered, it didn't just vanish, it tore a hole in the psychic fabric of the world, and I had been at ground zero. I could feel the shape of that hole, a silent, screaming void where the song used to be. It was a scar, and I could still feel its edges. "There's something wrong," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Everyone looked at me. The silence. It isn't empty. It's listening. Before anyone could ask what I meant, Ilara's comms unit, a device designed to pick up only encrypted resistance frequencies, crackled to life. It was our first contact with the outside world since the mission began. But it wasn't one of our call signs. It was a clean, open channel, broadcasting on every frequency at once. A single, mathematically perfect sequence of tones played, a short, inquisitive melody. Then came the voice. It wasn't human. It wasn't alien. It was something in between, a synthesized voice, calm and clear, speaking perfect English. It spoke from our comms unit, from the city's broadcast system, and from a place deep inside the new silence in my head. It said only 3 words. "Error has been detected." The voice of the Weavers. They hadn't been silent because they were distant or uncaring. They had been silent because everything was working as intended. We hadn't just broken their instrument. We had tripped an alarm. The broadcast continued. The calm, synthetic voice echoing in the concrete tunnel around us. A promise and a threat in one. Correction has been initiated. The ground began to shake, not from a structural collapse, but from a deep, rhythmic vibration. It was coming from the lakefront, from the direction of the old hydroponic farms. It was the sound of 1,000,000 people, their panic erased, their confusion clarified, rising to their feet. They were no longer screaming. They were no longer lost. They had been given a new purpose. They were turning, all at once, to face inland, to face us. The Weavers were done with their song. Now, they were sending the choir. The city was no longer screaming. It was moving. The rhythmic vibration intensified, a bass drum beat that resonated in our bones. Through a sewer grate, I could see them. The panicked mob had transformed into a silent, flowing river of people, their movements no longer chaotic, but precise, unified. They were marching, their milky blue eyes all fixed on some unseen point in the city's heart. They were an army of sleepers, weaponized by the very beings we thought we had blinded. "They're being herded," Elara said, her face illuminated by the green glow of her datapad. That crude signal from the Central Authority put them under, but this new broadcast from the Weavers, it's giving them direction. It's a shepherd tone, on a psychic level. "They're hunting," I said, the truth of it landing like a block of ice in my stomach. I could feel the faint residue of the Weavers' intent in the silence. A cold, clean directive: find the anomaly, erase the error. "They're hunting us." The hollowed-out space in my mind, the scar left by the spire's destruction, was no longer just an absence of sound. It was a beacon, in a world that was supposed to be perfectly in tune. Our silence was a deafening roar. "Extraction point is compromised," Anya stated, her voice devoid of panic. She was already calculating, adapting. "The lakefront is a kill zone. We need a new plan." "We go down," Jorik rumbled, tapping his boot on the concrete floor. "The old service tunnels, the deep subway lines, they predate the Weavers. Their network won't have them mapped." "He's right," Elara agreed, already pulling up pre-harmony schematics of the city's underbelly. "There's a primary nexus for the old grid 3 blocks from here. If we can get to it, we'll have miles of tunnels to lose them in." The plan was desperate, a retreat into the city's forgotten bowels, but it was the only one we had. We moved through the maintenance corridor, our footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The only sounds were our own breathing and the distant, rhythmic tramp of 1,000,000 feet marching in unison above us. It felt like we were rats in the walls of a house that was being systematically fumigated. The entrance to the deep subway was a rusted, circular hatch in the floor of a power substation. Jorik put his shoulder to it and heaved. With a groan of tortured metal, it gave way, revealing a dark, cavernous space that smelled of stagnant water and decay. A cold draft washed over us, carrying the scent of a place that hadn't seen a living soul in years. One by one, we descended the iron ladder, leaving the surface world behind. As I climbed down, I took one last look up through the hatch. The sky was the color of a day-old bruise, and against it, I saw something that made my blood run cold. High above, circling the dead spire like vultures, were the sentinels. Dozens of them. They were no longer formless, localized glitches. They had coalesced, taking on the shape of immense, crystalline birds, their wingspans as wide as city blocks, their bodies refracting the dim light in impossible ways. The Weavers weren't just sending their flock, they were sending their shepherds. The darkness of the subway tunnels was a comfort. Down here, we were beyond their sight. The rhythmic marching faded, replaced by the drip of water and the scuttling of unseen things in the shadows. We moved in the tight beam of Elara's headlamp, the crumbling concrete walls covered in the ghosts of old advertisements and graffiti, relics of a world that had shouted and argued and loved and fought. "The Nexus should be just ahead," Elara whispered, her voice a small sound in the immense dark. "It's an old switching station. From there, we can access the northbound tunnels that lead out of the city." But as we rounded a bend, the beam of her light fell upon something that stopped us in our tracks. The tunnel was blocked, not by a cave-in, but by a wall of the Weaver's strange, crystalline material. It pulsed with a faint, internal light, and it had grown organically from the floor and walls. A perfect, seamless barrier. "They're sealing the exits," Jorik growled, raising his rifle. "They're boxing us in." "That's impossible," Ilara stammered, looking at her schematics. "There are no power conduits down here. They shouldn't be able to generate this kind of structure." "They don't need power," I said, a dawning horror creeping over me. The silence in my head was no longer passive. It had a texture, a focus. The Weavers were learning. They're using the people, the biomass. They're focusing their collective psychic energy, turning them into a living lens to manifest these things. I could almost feel it, a million minds, all focused on a single, simple thought: seal the way. The city wasn't just our prison, it was our jailer. Anya walked to the wall, her expression grim. "Yorick, can you breach it?" "Negative," he said, shaking his head. "That's the same material as the spire. It would take the main charge to even scratch it, and we left that upstairs." We were trapped. The city above was a hunting ground, the tunnels below a cage. The silence pressed in, no longer a comfort, but the sound of a closing trap. For the first time since the mission began, I saw a flicker of doubt in Anya's eyes. We had been so focused on the spire, on the singular, monumental task, that we never considered what would come after. We had kicked the hornet's nest, and now the swarm was not just coming for us. It was rewriting the hive around us to ensure we could never escape. It was then that a new sound reached us, faint but clear, echoing from a side tunnel we had just passed. It was music. Not the all-encompassing song of the Weavers, but something else. A single instrument, a guitar, playing a simple, melancholic melody. It was a sound so profoundly human, it felt like a ghost. We looked at each other, a silent question passing between us. A trap, a hallucination. Anya made a decision. She gestured with her rifle down the side tunnel. "Slow and quiet," she mouthed. We moved toward the sound, our weapons raised. The music grew louder. A lonely and defiant tune played in the heart of the dead city. It led us to a heavy steel door, part of an old, forgotten bomb shelter. The music was coming from inside. Anya knocked. A sharp, 3-tap code. The music stopped. A moment of tense silence, and then the sound of a heavy bolt being thrown. The door creaked open a few inches, revealing a sliver of a man's face, his eyes shadowed and wary. "You're not them," he said, his voice raspy. "You're loud." He opened the door, and we stepped into a small, cluttered space, lit by a string of battery-powered bulbs. The room was a pocket of the past, filled with books, scavenged tech, and maps of the city. The man was thin, with a wiry gray beard and the haunted eyes of someone who had been alone for a very long time. In his hands, he held an old and battered acoustic guitar. "Who are you?" Anya demanded, her rifle still trained on him. "My name is Silas," he said, his gaze falling on me. "And I'm like him, a broken radio. Can't hear the music." He was another anomaly, a mind the Weaver's song couldn't touch. But unlike me, he hadn't been found by the Resistance. He had just survived. Hidden. "You've been down here this whole time?" Ilara asked, her voice full of disbelief. "Since the beginning," Silas confirmed. "The song is weaker down here, and this shelter is shielded, lid-lined. Old world paranoia has its perks." He looked us over, his eyes lingering on our gear. You're the ones who did it, aren't you? You're the ones who turned off the music." His expression wasn't one of gratitude. It was one of profound weariness. "You have no idea what you've done." "We liberated them," Yorick said, his voice defensive. Silas let out a dry, mirthless chuckle. "You broke their chains, son. But you also burned down the zoo. Those people up there. They haven't been human for 5 years. They don't remember how. You didn't give them freedom. You gave them terror. And you gave the Weavers something they haven't had to use until now, a motive." "They're sealing the tunnels," Anya said, cutting to the chase. "We need a way out of the city." Jersey, Silas nodded, walking over to a large map pinned to the wall. It was a detailed schematic of the city's underbelly, but it was covered in his own handwritten notes. "They're sealing the main lines." "Yes." "But they don't know the whole story." He pointed to a series of faint, dotted lines on the map. "This is the old freight network. Decommissioned a century ago after the big quake. Most of it is collapsed, but not all. There's a spur line that runs west, all the way out to the dead zones beyond the suburbs. It's our only way out." "Can you lead us there?" Anya asked. Silas looked at me again, a strange, searching expression on his face. "The scar you carry?" "From the spire. It's loud. Louder than you think. They'll follow it. They'll follow you." "I know," I said, the words tasting like ash. "Can you lead us?" He let out a long sigh, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of 5 years of solitude. "I suppose I don't have much choice. You brought the storm to my doorstep. The least you can do is give me a ride out of town." Our new, reluctant guide led us deeper into the labyrinth. The tunnels of the old freight network were smaller, tighter, and choked with the dust of a century. We moved in single file, the air thick and stagnant. Here, the silence was absolute. The city above, the marching armies, the crystalline sentinels, it all felt a million miles away. But I knew it wasn't. The scar in my mind was a constant dull throb, a psychic wound that would not heal, and I could feel the Weaver's attention focused on it, like a surgeon probing for a splinter. They were no longer just broadcasting a general command. They were adapting, refining their search. After what felt like hours, Silas stopped. We had reached a massive circular chamber where several tunnels converged. At the center of the chamber was a pool of dark, still water, and rising from it was something that didn't belong. It was a single perfect pillar of the Weaver's crystal, about 10 feet tall, humming with a low, resonant energy. It was a node, a psychic repeater, grown down here in the darkness to amplify their search. "They're getting smarter," Silas breathed, his face pale. And then, from the pillar, a voice spoke. It was the same calm, synthesized voice we had heard before, but this time, it was not a broadcast. It was speaking directly to me, the words forming inside my head, cold and precise. "Anomaly detected." It said, "Designation Kalen, you are the source of the error. Your silence is a threat to harmony. Cease resistance. Allow correction." I felt a pressure build in my mind, a targeted assault far more sophisticated than the Sentinel's crude attack. It wasn't trying to scare me. It was trying to rewrite me. I felt my own memories begin to fray, the faces of my team blurring, the purpose of our mission dissolving into meaningless noise. The voice was offering me the one thing I had craved my entire life: quiet. A true, perfect silence, not of absence, but of completion. It was showing me the beauty of its equation, the elegant finality of its purpose. "It's talking to him," Alara said, her own voice sounding distant and warped. "The node is interfacing directly with his mind. Kyle, fight it." Anya's voice was a pinprick of reality in the rising tide of psychic oblivion. I tried to hold on, but it was like trying to build a sand castle in a hurricane. I was just one broken mind against an intelligence that spanned galaxies. My resistance was a statistical improbability, an error that was being, quite logically, deleted. I was losing. My hand went to the pistol at my hip, my finger finding the trigger. Correction. The thought was not my own, but it felt right. Logical. The source of the error must be erased. Anya saw what I was doing. She took a step toward me, her hand outstretched. "Kale, don't." But as the node pulsed with a final, overwhelming wave of energy, and my own will crumbled to dust, something unexpected happened. Silas, the old man who had survived on his own for 5 years, stepped in front of me. He held up his old acoustic guitar, not as a weapon, but as an offering, and he began to play. It wasn't the sad, melancholic tune from before. It was a wild, chaotic, and defiantly human chord. A blast of pure, unstructured sound. A note of pure, stubborn, illogical life. The crystalline node recoiled, its light flickering. The voice in my head faltered, confused by this new, unexpected variable. Silas's music was the antithesis of the Weaver's song. It was imperfect, emotional, and utterly, beautifully meaningless. It was art, and in the face of it, the Weaver's perfect mathematics had no answer. The spell was broken. I gasped, stumbling back, my mind my own again. The node, unable to compute the raw, chaotic data of the music, began to overload. Cracks spread across its surface, and with a final, discordant shriek, it shattered, plunging the chamber into darkness. Silas stood there, his hands still on the strings of his guitar, breathing heavily. "Harmony," he wheezed, a faint, weary smile on his face. "They can't stand a little bit of noise." He had saved me, but as the last echoes of the exploding node faded, a new sound began, coming from all the tunnels around us. It was a skittering, clicking sound, the sound of many legs on concrete. The Weavers were done sending their sleepers. They were done growing their network. They had adapted again. Now, they were sending their corrections in person, and they were coming from all sides. The skittering grew louder, a sound like 1,000 nails tapping on a stone floor, echoing from the multiple tunnel mouths that converged on our chamber. It was a sound that bypassed the ear and went straight to the primal, lizard part of the brain that knows the sound of a predator. Ilara swept the beam of her headlamp across the openings, and the light caught them. They poured from the darkness not like a wave, but like a tide of twitching, disjointed limbs. They weren't sentinels. They weren't biomass. They were something new, something nightmarish and efficient. They were constructs, assembled in the dark. Their bodies were a grotesque fusion of scavenged technology and Weaver crystal, all animated by a single hive mind purpose. I saw a torso made from a rusted subway car door, scuttling forward on 6 spidery legs crafted from bent rebar and glowing crystalline shards. Another was a rolling mass of discarded computer terminals and wiring, a single, blue optic lens glowing at its center. They were the city's ghosts. Its discarded junk, given a horrifying second life. The Weavers were not just architects, they were scavengers, repurposing our dead world to hunt us down. Constructs. Silas breathed, his face ashen in the bouncing light. And they're using the city itself as their army. West Tunnel, Anya yelled, her voice cutting through the rising panic. That's the one Silas said leads out Ilara. With me, Yorick. Silas, Sinus, Kyle. You're on rear guard. Don't let them pin us down. There was no time to think, only to react. Anya and Ilara sprinted for the designated tunnel mouth, while Yorick spun around, his pulse rifle spitting bolts of blue energy into the advancing tide. The bolts struck the constructs with concussive force, shattering crystal and blowing chunks of rusted metal from their bodies. But they barely slowed. For every one that fell, 3 more clambered over its twitching remains. They moved with an unnatural, jerky gait, ignoring damage, their only goal to close the distance. My hands were shaking as I raised my pistol. The emptiness in my head, the scar, was throbbing in time with the construct's advance. I could feel the cold, simple directive that drove them capture the anomaly. They weren't trying to kill me. They were trying to take me. I fired, the small caliber rounds pinging uselessly off the larger construct's plating. Silas, surprisingly, didn't run. He stood his ground next to me, his guitar held like a shield. He wasn't a fighter, but 5 years of solitude had burned away all his fear, leaving only a core of stubborn defiance. They don't like noise, he shouted over the din. Give 'em hell, son. He was right. My psychic scream had disrupted the sentinel. His music had shattered the node. The Weaver's strength was their unity, their perfect harmony. Our only weapon was chaos. I looked at Yorick, who was methodically firing, his face a grim mask of concentration. His rifle was powerful, but it was a single, rhythmic note of destruction. We needed a symphony of it. Yorick, suppression fire. I yelled. Don't aim, just spray, create a wall of noise. He seemed to understand. He adjusted his rifle's output, and instead of single bolts, it unleashed a rapid-fire volley, a jackhammer of energy that filled the tunnel with a deafening roar. The constructs in the direct path of the fire were torn apart, but more importantly, the others faltered. Their advance became disjointed, their movements losing their unified purpose. The sheer chaotic noise of the rifle fire was interfering with their control signal. It bought us the seconds we needed. We fell back, retreating into the west tunnel as Yorick walked backwards, laying down a curtain of fire. The tunnel was narrow, forcing the constructs into a bottleneck. We ran, our footsteps echoing in the tight space, the skittering of the pursuing machines just yards behind us. The freight tunnel was a straight, featureless tube that seemed to stretch into infinity. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs felt like lead. Only when the skittering sound had finally faded into the distance did Anya call a halt. We collapsed against the cold, damp walls, gasping for breath. We were alive, but we were running out of places to hide. They're adapting too fast, Ilara said, her voice ragged. First the biomass, then the nodes. Now, that. They learn from every move we make. They're not just learning, I said, my mind racing. The scar in my head was no longer just a passive beacon. In the heat of the fight, I had felt something brush against it, a flicker of the Weaver's consciousness, as they directed their puppets. They're focusing on me. The node wasn't just a repeater, it was a scanner. It was trying to map the flaw in my mind, to understand why I'm immune. They're not just trying to eliminate the error. They're trying to patch it. Anya looked at me, her sharp eyes missing nothing. You're saying they could learn to control you, or create more like me. But loyal, I finished. The thought was chilling. An army of oracles, all singing the Weaver's tune. It would be the end of everything. Silas, who had kept up surprisingly well for an old man, slid down the wall, his breathing heavy. So, this freight line, it's not an escape route. It's just a longer cage. We were all silent for a moment, the weight of his words settling on us. We were a virus, and the host was developing antibodies. We couldn't outrun an enemy that could rebuild the world around us. No, Anya said, her voice low but firm, cutting through the despair. It's not a cage. It's a weapon. We all stared at her. What are you talking about? Yorick asked. The Weaver's strength is their network, she explained, her mind clearly working several steps ahead. The spire was the hub, but the city itself, the biomass, the nodes, it's all part of a decentralized system. We cut off the head, but the body is still twitching. In fact, it's growing 1,000 new heads. So we're doomed, Silas muttered. No, Anya repeated, a glint in her eye. We just need to introduce a new variable. Kyle. They're focused on you, on the hole you represent in their network. They're pouring all their processing power into this one. Tiny flaw. I began to see where she was going. It was a terrifying, insane piece of logic. You want me to be bait? No, she said, shaking her head. I want you to be a bomb, a logic bomb. You're the one piece of data they can't compute. Your mind is the psychic equivalent of a paradox to them. If we can get you close enough to a primary processing nexus, and you do what you did at the spire. I almost died, I said, the memory of that agony still fresh. It would have killed you if the explosion hadn't severed the connection, Alara clarified. But this time, there's no explosion. You'd be opening a direct, sustained connection. You'd be pouring the raw, chaotic data of a human mind directly into their core programming. It wouldn't just disrupt them. It could crash the entire regional system. And it would almost certainly burn out your brain in the process, Yorick added bluntly. It was a suicide mission, not just a mission where I might die, but one where my death was the primary objective. I would become a martyr. My consciousness, the bullet that would, hopefully, kill the beast. I looked at the faces around me in the dim light. Yorick, the stoic soldier, his jaw set. Alara, the brilliant analyst, her eyes full of a terrible calculus. Silas, the weary survivor, his face a mask of resignation. And Anya, the unbending leader, asking me to make the ultimate sacrifice, not with a plea, but with the cold, hard logic of a general who sees the one desperate move that could win the war. I thought of the screaming people in the streets, of the hollowed-out peace of the harmony. I thought of the world we had lost, a world of messy, beautiful, painful chaos. Where is this nexus? I asked. Alara pulled up her schematics again. According to Silas's map and my scans, the old freight line passes directly underneath a major pre-harmony geological research facility, the Core TAP project. They were drilling miles into the Earth's crust. The facility was powered by its own geothermal generator, completely off the main grid. A perfect place for the Weavers to set up a new hub after the spire fell. Anya finished. It's isolated, secure, and has its own massive power source. It's about 10 miles down this tunnel, Silas said, pointing a trembling finger into the darkness. But you don't understand. That place, it was abandoned for a reason. The things they were drilling into, they found something down there. Something that wasn't supposed to be woken up. Our path was set. We were no longer running from the city. We were running toward its new, dark heart. We moved with a renewed, grim purpose. Every step I took felt heavier, a countdown to my own end. The silence in my head felt different now. Not an emptiness, but a canvas, waiting for one final, terrible masterpiece. We reached the access point to the research facility an hour later. It was a massive, reinforced blast door set into the side of the tunnel, covered in dust and warnings about seismic instability. It was sealed, but not by the Weavers. This was old-world tech, designed to keep something in. Ilara got to work on the electronic lock, her fingers flying over her datapad. "It's a military-grade quarantine lock," she muttered. "I can bypass it, but it's going to take a few minutes." While she worked, I felt a change in the psychic atmosphere. The Weavers knew where we were. The distant skittering of the constructs started again, coming from the direction we had just run. They were closing in. "They're coming," Yorick said, taking up a defensive position, his rifle aimed down the long, dark tunnel. "Faster this time." "I'm almost there," Ilara said, sweat beading on her forehead. The scar in my mind was on fire now. The Weavers were no longer just probing. They were pushing, a sustained, focused pressure that made the air feel thick and hard to breathe. I could feel their frustration, their cold, mathematical rage at this illogical, persistent error. And then I felt something else, a new presence, brushing against the edges of my consciousness. It wasn't the clean, cold signal of the Weavers. This was something else, something ancient and vast and deep. It was coming from below us, from whatever the core tap had woken up, a presence that had been sleeping under the continent for millennia and had just been disturbed by the psychic noise of the Weavers. The blast door hissed open. "I'm in," Ilara shouted, but as we prepared to enter, a new voice echoed in the silence of my mind. It was not the synthetic, logical voice of the Weavers. This one was ancient, powerful, and utterly alien. It was the sound of rock grinding against rock, of continents shifting, and it asked a single, terrifying question that was not directed at me, but at the Weavers who were hunting me. "Who dares disturb our sleep?" The skittering of the constructs abruptly stopped. The psychic pressure from the Weavers vanished, replaced by a sudden, focused spike of what felt, impossibly, like their fear. We had not just found their new nexus. We had found it on the doorstep of something far, far older, and we had just rung the doorbell. The silence that followed the ancient voice was more profound than any we had experienced. It was a silence of pure, primal awe. The Weavers, the architects of continental peace, the beings whose intellect spanned the cosmos, had gone quiet. The skittering constructs in the tunnel behind us froze mid-stride, their glowing blue optics dimming to a dull flicker. The psychic scar in my mind, which had been a raging fire moments before, was now utterly cold, the weaver's insistent pressure gone as if it had never been. They had turned their full attention to the new, ancient presence that had just announced itself from the deep earth. What was that? Jork breathed, his pulse rifle still aimed down the dark tunnel, though the immediate threat seemed to have vanished. That, Silas said, his face pale and slick with sweat, his eyes wide with a terror that went beyond the weavers, is why they abandoned this place. They didn't just drill into the crust, they drilled into a tomb. The air flowing out of the open blast door was cold, ancient, and carried a faint, metallic scent, like ozone and old blood. A low, subsonic hum began to emanate from the depths of the facility, a vibration that we felt more in our teeth and bones than heard with our ears. The plan has changed, Anya said, her voice tight but unwavering. She was the anchor in our sea of chaos. The Nexus is still our target, but we are no longer the primary threat. We're caught in the middle of something else. My purpose, the suicide run, had been thrown into question. Crashing the Weaver's network seemed almost redundant if a subterranean god was about to do it for us. But Anya was right. We couldn't count on one monster to save us from another. We had to finish our mission. We stepped through the doorway into the core tap facility. The place was a mausoleum of human ambition. Vast, cavernous chambers were filled with dormant, dust-shrouded machinery, gantries, and cranes, all centered around a colossal shaft that plunged into the earth, a black, circular maw that seemed to swallow the light. Emergency power was still active, casting long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed in the corners of our vision. The deep, resonant hum was stronger in here, a constant, physical presence. As we moved deeper into the facility, we saw the Weaver's influence. Their crystalline structures grew here like mold, crawling over the human technology, integrating with it. Cables of living light snaked from the walls, all leading down toward the geothermal generator at the bottom of the shaft, and, presumably, to their new nexus. But their growth here was hesitant. The crystal was a dull, sickly gray, not the vibrant silver of the spire. It was as if the ancient presence below was inhibiting them, the very geology of the place resisting their incursion. We found the elevator, its power systems co-opted by the Weaver tech. As we descended, the hum grew into a roar, the vibration so intense it threatened to shake the elevator car apart. Through the reinforced glass, we could see the shaft walls, miles of rock giving way to strange, non-Euclidean architecture that had been exposed by the drill, structures that were not built, but grown, pulsating with a faint crimson light. This was a place of immense sleeping power. The elevator opened onto the final level, a massive, spherical chamber built around the geothermal tap itself. The heat was intense, the air thick with steam. At the center of the chamber, suspended over the glowing heart of the planet, was the Weaver's nexus. It was a chaotic, cancerous thing, a sphere of writhing crystal and co-opted human tech, far uglier and more desperate than the elegant core of the spire. It pulsed with a frantic, terrified energy. They were afraid. For the first time, I felt the raw emotion of the Weavers, and it was pure, abject terror. They had inadvertently built their new home on the roof of a Leviathan, and they had just woken it up, and then we saw it. Or rather, a part of it, from the geothermal shaft below the Nexus. A single, colossal tendril of what looked like living obsidian rock had risen. It was impossibly huge, wider than the elevator we had ridden down in, and it pulsed with the same crimson light as the structures in the walls. It wasn't attacking the Nexus. It was observing it, studying it. The ancient voice echoed in my head once more, not as words, but as pure, conceptual thought. It was communicating, not with us, but with the Weaver's Nexus. You are loud. You are dissonant. You disturb the deep harmony. You will be silenced. It's a planetary immune system, Elara whispered in awe. The planet itself, it's alive. And the Weavers are a parasite. The tendril moved, slowly, deliberately. It reached out and touched the Weaver's Nexus. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. The Nexus convulsed. A wave of pure, chaotic psychic energy erupted from it. A death scream of an intelligence being unmade. The lights in the chamber flickered and died, plunging us into a terrifying darkness, illuminated only by the crimson glow from below. The entire facility groaned, the structure complaining under the strain of energies it was never meant to contain. The Weaver's control over the constructs, the biomass, the very city above, was being violently severed. But in their death throes, they lashed out. A final, desperate directive, aimed at the source of their downfall. At me. A bolt of pure psychic force. The last dregs of the Nexus's power shot across the chamber and struck me. It wasn't a subtle attack. It was a battering ram. The world dissolved into white noise and unbearable pain. I was untethered from reality, my consciousness thrown into the chaotic, dying mind of the Weaver Collective. I saw galaxies being born and dying. I saw them flee from a greater, unknown predator across the cosmic void. I saw them find Earth, a quiet, chaotic little world, perfect for their harmony. And I saw their plan, not just to pacify, but to transform. To slowly, over centuries, convert the planet's entire biomass into a part of their collective, a new vessel for their ancient, weary consciousness. We weren't just cattle. We were their future body. Then, my mind was torn away from theirs and pulled down into the deep, slow consciousness of the earth itself. The ancient presence, the sleeper, regarded me. It felt my mind, my flawed, chaotic, human thoughts. It saw my defiance, my pain, my stubborn will to live free, even if that freedom meant self-destruction. And in a moment of contact that felt like it lasted an eon, it showed me a truth that shattered everything I thought I knew. The Weavers were not the original architects of the song. They were just mimics. The true song, the deep harmony the sleeper spoke of, was the slow, rhythmic pulse of the planet itself, the collective consciousness of life evolving over billions of years. The Weavers had tried to hijack it, to replace its complex, organic symphony with their own, simple, synthetic melody. We hadn't just been fighting for our freedom. We had been fighting for the soul of our world. The contact broke. I was back in my own body, gasping on the metal floor of the chamber. The crimson light from the shaft was fading. The great tendril slowly, majestically, receding back into the depths. Its work was done. The Weaver's Nexus was a dead, dark husk. The hum was gone. The silence was no longer empty or listening. It was peaceful, a deep, resonant quiet that felt alive. My team was gathered around me, Anya was holding my head, her face etched with a concern I had never seen before. "Kyle, are you with us?" I sat up, my head throbbing, but my mind clearer than it had ever been. The scar, the psychic wound, was gone. Not healed over, but filled. The sleeper's touch had not just erased the Weaver's influence, it had integrated me back into the planet's true song. I could still hear it, not as a sound, but as a feeling. The gentle, rhythmic pulse of a billion living things, all beautifully, chaotically, imperfectly alive. "I'm okay," I said, my voice hoarse. "It's over." We made our way back to the surface in the echoing silence. The constructs were inert piles of junk. The city, when we emerged into the gray dawn, was quiet. The biomass, the millions of people who had been the Weaver's puppets, were lying in the streets, not dead, but sleeping. A deep, natural sleep, free of psychic influence for the first time in 5 years. They would wake up, as they had before, to confusion and fear. The world was still broken. Humanity was still a mess. But this time, it was our mess. We had our world back, with all its glorious, terrifying, beautiful noise. In the months that followed, the world began to wake up. It was a slow, painful process. Cities had to be reclaimed. Memories had to be sorted. A future had to be built from the rubble of 2 failed utopias. The central authority, the human collaborators, vanished into the shadows, their crude attempts at control now useless. Silas became an unlikely prophet, his simple, human music a balm for the waking souls. Anya and Jorik became leaders in the new, decentralized effort to rebuild, their pragmatism and strength a vital anchor. Ilara dedicated herself to studying the dead Weaver tech, determined to understand our enemy and, perhaps, to learn from them. And me, I was no longer an oracle, no longer a weapon. I was just a man who could feel the rhythm of the world a little more keenly than others. The curse had become a gift. I could feel the pulse of life returning, the slow, steady beat of a world healing itself. The Weavers were gone, a discordant note that had been corrected by a power far greater than their own. But the stars were still there, and the universe is vast. I knew we were not alone, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. We were loud, we were chaotic, we were free, and we were finally singing our own song,